What's up, everybody? It's Jordan, and welcome to the Sports Suit Hine Show. And today I have Bengals NFL, aka Braeden Guthrie. How you doing today, Braeden?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to talk about going through each team in the NFL's record. We like to talk about the Bengals a lot, but I think it's great to look at everybody. It can give you some perspective. I'm glad there were some awards, but mostly I'm really excited to go through the Bengals schedule and see what we can really expect.
Yeah, we have a ton of stuff to talk about, and I mean ton, I mean an absolute ton. We're going to be literally talking about every single team to some capacity. We're going to be talking about kind of previewing each division here a little bit. It's going to having our awards, MVP and stuff like that, and previewing the Bengals season, game by game predictions for the upcoming Bengals season. It is absolutely crazy. The Bengals play 1 week from today against the Steelers week one. Does not seem real. It feels like this was the fastest offseason ever. I was hoping to have these videos separate, and I have not had a lot of time to record, so that's why we're doing all of these in just one and mashing it all together. But we'll go ahead and get started talking about the divisions here. We won't spend a lot of time talking about here, but the divisions. We'll start off with the AFC South. An interesting division, in my opinion, arguably the worst division in the NFL the past couple of years. I think it's slightly better than people think it is now. I think the Jaguars are a team that I don't think they're a playoff contender, but I think they're a team that people maybe need to start possibly keeping an eye on in a year or two. I think they're definitely a playoff contender. But the AFC South, to me, the 4th seed, I had the Houston Texans 4-13. They won 4 games last year. They fired the coach, was kind of surprising there. The Jaguars, they had the the first pick. They took Trayvon Walker from Georgia. I think they're going to be 6-11, a much better improvement compared to the past couple of years where they've had back-to-back number 1 overall picks. Tennessee, they were the 1st seed in the AFC last year, and to me, it still seems crazy that they were, despite Derrick Henry missed some time. I've never been high on Tennessee, despite Tennessee, look at the past 4 or 5 years. They've been one of the more underrated teams in the NFL. I had the Colts being 10-7 and winning the AFC South. It seems like ever since Andrew Luck has retired, their quarterbacks has just been a revolving door. There's a new quarterback every single season, and I think Matt Ryan is the best quarterback that the Colts have had since Andrew Luck's departure. And I think he's going to make a huge impact for the Colts this year, and that's why I think the Colts will end up winning the AFC South this upcoming season.
Yeah, so when I did these records, what I actually did is I went to one of those websites where you can predict every game week by week. So that's how I did these predictions, and I was a little surprised. And so for the AFC South, in last place, I have the Houston Texans at 2-15. They're a team who I'm very low on. I actually do really like Mills, I think, but when you really look at it, he's not a game-changing quarterback. He was a 3rd or 4th, whichever one it was. So I forget. He was a good quarterback put in a bad scenario, but when you look at his athleticism and just overall potential, you're at most getting an Andy Dalton as quarterback, which for a 3rd or 4th round pick at quarterback, just about as good as you can realistically get. Now in 11th, that was the whole AFC rankings. 3rd in the division, I had the Jacksonville Jaguars, just like you. But I had them at 8 and 9. When I did these predictions, I didn't expect them to have those many wins, but when I look at it, they have Trevor Lawrence. He was the 1st overall pick for a reason last draft. He was put in a pretty horrible situation with Urban Meyer and that whole situation. There was so much going on. Travis Etienne, he's coming in after essentially missing all his rookie year. I'm very high on him, even though I thought taking him in the 1st round was questionable, but that's now beyond the point. And, Christian Kirk, that contract was very awful. Like, I'm not justifying it here, but let's not forget, he is a playmaker. He is a very, very good receiver. That's going to help Trevor Lawrence. So I think they'll get more wins than people are expecting. Then for the Titans, I agree with just about everything you said. I also have the same record for them, 9-8. Derrick Henry's obviously a beast. And no, I wouldn't say if he goes down, they could be screwed, but we saw that last year, and they still had the number 1 seed. But as the year went out, Tannehill finished very weak. This year, NFL teams are taking advantage of what they saw without Derrick Henry and Tannehill. So if he does get hurt again, teams are going to take advantage. Even if they don't, I wouldn't be surprised if they even look at the Bengals Titans game from the playoffs. How did the Bengals do so well in stopping Derrick Henry? And like you, I also have the Colts winning division. I have them at 12-5. No, I really like Matt Ryan. I I agree with you. He is the best quarterback for them since Andrew Luck. He's obviously not back in his prime, but I feel like what the Colts have been missing is a veteran quarterback who can lead. And I think Ryan can do that. He doesn't need to be a superstar. He's got weapons around him. He has arguably the best running back around him. So I think the Colts can be a legit playoff contender.
Yeah, the AFC South should be very, very interesting, but it's one of those scenarios, just like it has past couple of years. It's still pretty much just between the Colts and the Titans. But maybe next year the Jaguars could possibly, be in that mix. Now, talking about the AFC South, moving to the NFC South, this is a division to me. I think it is much more interesting than people think it is. You look at the, NFC South. Forward to me, I have the Atlanta Falcons. I have them at 4-13. Arthur Smith, Coach Marcus Mariota. I want to see how that goes. They also drafted Desmond Ridder. Some people are high on him. I'm not that high on him. But I don't think the Falcons are going to be that good. The Panthers, I have them at 7-10. If Baker Mayfield can just play average, I think this Panthers team could be all right. I think DJ Moore is probably the most underrated receiver in the NFL. Christian McCaffrey, when he's healthy, is freaking amazing, but he has to stay healthy. That's the main thing for Carolina. This is where it gets crazy. I know people will not agree with this. I have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers being second in the NFC South. And I know it sounds crazy, but when you look at all the departures the Buccaneers have had, I mean, we're talking about their offensive line. Alex Kappa's gone. Ryan Jensen's out for a long extended period of time. Gronkowski's on. O.J. Howard's gone. This is not the Tampa Bay offense we've seen in the past, like Tom Brady. I know they brought in Julio Jones, but he is nowhere near what he used to be. To me, I think this is without a doubt Tampa Bay's worst roster since Tom Brady has been with the Buccaneers. And then you look at the Saints. The Saints, to me, I think are extremely underrated. Everybody loves to, knock on Jameis Winston. He threw for 30 interceptions, with the Buccaneers a couple years ago. But last season, he was really, really good for the Saints. He was 5-2 as a starter. He threw 14 touchdowns, just 3 interceptions. 14 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. And that was without Michael Thomas playing a snap last year. And not only does he get Michael Thomas back, he gets Michael Thomas back. He's Jarvis Landry, he's signed with the Saints, and they get a very, very talented wide receiver. I'm really, really high on Chris Olave. So when you look at the Saints, their offense was good last year until Winston got hurt, and now you get these 3 new additions. I think they can be really good. And not to mention, when you look at the regular season stats between the Saints and the Buccaneers, Tom Brady has played 4 games against the Saints since he's been the Tampa Bay starter. He has not beat the Saints in the regular season since he's been the Tampa Bay starter. That's something to kind of look in there. I know they lost, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, traded him. And I still really, really like the Saints. They're one of my surprise teams this year, and I think they actually have a shot at winning their division this year.
Yeah, no, that's why I like doing this videos, because I have a pretty big different outlook on this, but everything you said makes perfect sense. So, like you, I have the Falcons in last place in the division, except 3-14, so very similar there. The way I look at it, I really like Marcus Mariota as a person. He's a great guy, hard worker, but he's just a bridge quarterback right now. And I also agree with you about Desmond Ridder, which may get me crucified, but it is what it is. I think he can be an okay quarterback. He can maybe have a Davis Mills type experience, but long term, is he going to be anything special? I don't think so. He's just kind of, I hate to say just another guy, but when you consider athleticism and going off script, he needs to be put in a really good scenario. And not that he'll start this year, but the Falcons are not in a good situation. Now for second and third, I have the Panthers at 6-11. And I also have the Saints at 6-11. Saints in second place because I have them doing a 3-3 division record versus the Panthers 2-4. And I was shocked when I came to the end of this. I was really tempted to go back and maybe make a bit different predictions, but I held myself off because there's a reason why I did the week by week one. And when I thought about it, because I do like Jameis Winston. I do. He's fun, but I think we're still going to see a lot of mental mistakes, a lot of turnovers. Their offensive line's in a curious position. I'm excited to see Trevor Penny, but everything I see, and obviously social media, when they do stuff like this, they love to highlight the bad stuff. But training camp, getting into fights, Senior Bowl, throwing the defensive end into its quarterback knees. And obviously, one offensive lineman won't state how good their offensive line is going to be, but I am concerned with that offensive line and Winston's mental awareness of the game. Also, a big significance for the Saints is, like you said, Michael Thomas last year was out. My question is, can he stay healthy? And much like Christian McCaffrey, it's like I want to believe he's going to be healthy. If he is, he's going to be a huge help, but I just can't be confident that until I see it. And you may throw hands with me, but I have the Buccaneers at number one, 13-4. Everything you said with, I agreed, but it's Tom Brady. I've bet against him so many times. He seems to always find a way. He still has Mike Evans. He still has Chris Godwin. It's interesting to see what's going to happen with Leonard Fournette because there's obviously reports at the start of training camp he came in way overweight. So if that is not an overreaction, that is a legit issue, then they will not get 13 wins. But I think Tom Brady's just going to work his magic again, and that's why I have them where they are.
Yeah, the Buccaneers are in an interesting spot because this is, I mean, we've kind of said this. It feels like the last 7 or 8 years, but this could be, Brady's last year, especially, he's already retired once, but really short-lived, but should be interesting there with the NFC South. Moving on to the AFC East here, this is an interesting division because I feel like this is just a weird one because I feel like all 4 of these teams are capable of being playoff contenders, but I just don't know if they will be. When you look at the AFC East, I like the Jets a lot. To me, I think they were one of the most underrated teams as we were heading into the offseason. But as more people kind of got in the hype train with the Jets, I've kind of jumped off that ship a little bit. I think Zach Wilson can do good. He has lots of weapons. There's no excuses for Zach Wilson now. He has a much better offensive line than, Sam Darnold, some of these other Jets quarterbacks have had in years past. I have the Jets at 7-10. Should be interesting. I might have their record a little bit better if Zach Wilson was for sure going to be starting the first couple of weeks, but with this injury, we saw a month or so ago. 3 for the AFC East. I have the New England Patriots as one of those, teams that they just really didn't get much better, but it didn't really get worse. They made no major moves in the offseason, unlike some of these other teams in their same division. But it's the Patriots. Bill Belichick's the best coach of all time. He's always going to have that team ready to go and a good team. He can make a crappy roster play great. But I had them at 10-7. Miami, I had them at 10-7. But this is really interesting one. When you look at some of their games, it's kind of a toss-up because when you look at the NFL, it seems like the majority of the time when teams win, they have the better quarterback. And when you look at Tua, he's not a great quarterback by any means. When him against Josh Allen, you're going to take a Josh Allen and the Bills 100 times. But the Dolphins, roster is really, really good. If they just had a slightly better quarterback, I would be much more high on this, Dolphins team. But we got to see how Tua can play this year. There's no more excuses for him. He has a good offensive line. They had arguably the best offseason of any team. But I have Miami 10-7, and then Buffalo 13-4. I think they're going to win the division pretty well with ease. I don't think anybody's going to be even close. Buffalo is one of the best teams in the NFL heading into the year, and I really think they're going to. When you look at these divisions, I think Buffalo really, really has this one by at least 3, maybe even 4 games. This is Buffalo's division to lose, and I think Buffalo will win this division. And it's really not even going to be close in my opinion.
Yeah, so I have both the Dolphins and Jets at 7-10. Like you were saying with the Dolphins, it's going to kind of depend on how Tua plays. Obviously, getting Tyreek Hill on that offense is going to be huge. It's going to help Tua out, and you don't want to overreact on social media clips that can be very misled. But like we have seen from those clips, and also reports from Miami beat reporters, while he is connecting with Tua, there's a lot of underthrows, and that only works so much to an extent. Then on the other hand, I also have the Jets at 7-10. I agree with you. I really like Zach Wilson. I think he's going to take a leap this year. I think Garrett Wilson's going to be a huge help to him. I just don't think the Jets are quite at that next level yet. I think if they have another good offseason, then we could potentially see them as playoff threats. Then next, I have the Patriots at 8-9. It's always hard to predict the Patriots. Obviously, for more than a few years now, no Tom Brady, but every year you just kind of see Bill Belichick gets them a way to win. But just not the Patriots, but all of the AFC East have a really tough schedule, kind of like you were talking about with Tua. But usually you see it's the best quarterback, and I think there's just going to be a few times where we see Mac Jones get outdueled, and that's why they'll fall under 500. Then I have the same prediction as you with the Bills winning the division at 13-4. I don't think I need to add anything to what you said.
So looking at the AFC East this year, it's Buffalo. I mean, unless Josh Allen gets hurt, this is Buffalo's division 100%. And when you look at other teams, when you look at other divisions around the NFL, there's very, very few teams you could say that about anybody else. I mean, obviously, when you look at the Bengals at the AFC North, obviously you expect the Bengals to win the AFC North. But I mean, teams like the Steelers. The Steelers are the Steelers. Year in and year out, they're going to be a great team. And you look at some of these other teams. To me, I think a team that I really think is it's their division to lose. They're 100% going to win their division. That's the Eagles. I've never been high on I've never been high on Jalen Hurts, but I think the Eagles could be really good this year. Moving forward to the NFC East, Washington had them at 5-12. Carson Wentz. It makes no sense. They traded a lot for him. I don't get why they did not try to trade for another quarterback, a guy like Russell Wilson, because when you look at Russell Wilson, pair with Terry McLaurin in their backfield, they could be really, really good. But Wentz, I mean, there's times that he looks good, other times he looks absolutely god awful. And when he's playing okay, when you look at Tyler Heineke, at times there's not a major difference between the two quarterbacks. And I don't think they're going to be good. I had them at 5-12. New York, they are a team that have not been able to stay healthy the past couple of years. Daniel Jones missed 6 games last year. When you look at the wide receiver core, Kadarius Toney, Sterling Shepard, and Kenny Golladay, those 3 receivers last year for the Giants missed a combined 20 games last year. It doesn't matter who you have at quarterback. When all those guys are missing games, you're not going to have a good team. Barkley's kind of unable to stay healthy. I am interested to see Brian Daboll, how he performs with Daniel Jones, because Brian Daboll was a major contributor to Josh Allen's development with Buffalo. I want to see how that goes, but I still don't see a much improvement this year with the Giants. The second, I have the Cowboys at 7-10. There's a couple overrated teams to me heading into the season. I have a kind of a top 3, top 4, most overrated, teams. Cowboys are definitely on that list. I don't get the obsession with Dallas year in and year out. This is our year. They're going to win a division. They're going to win a Super Bowl. We hear that every single year with some sports analysts. I just don't buy into it at all. When you look at this, Cowboys team, their roster is significantly worse compared to last season. Amari Cooper, I did think was overrated with Dallas, but you basically traded him for pennies to Cleveland. When you look at their offensive line last year was not nearly as what it used to be in years past. And then you lost Connor Williams to the Miami Dolphins. You lost Leo Collins to the Bengals. Dak Prescott was good last year, but when you lose one of his top weapons, when you lose some offensive linemen, and they lost Cedric Wilson Jr. to Miami, a wide receiver I liked a lot as well. When you look at this Dallas team, I think they're extremely overrated. And I know, as crazy as it sounds, when you look at quarterback play, it has a lot to do if you win or lose. And when you look at the NFC East, Daniel Jones has a chance to perform good with Brian Daboll this year. Carson Wentz, if he can play decent, this Washington team can be much better than the 5-12 record than they have them, being right now. But when you look at Dallas, I think there is a better chance that they are last in the NFC East than first in the NFC East. I know I sound crazy saying that, but you just look at these teams. I don't think there's a big gap between Washington and Dallas at all. I don't think there's a big gap between the Giants and Dallas at all, because the Giants have sucked the past couple of years, but we haven't seen that team healthy. Dallas, I just think they're always overrated. They've lost so many players. I don't think they're going to be nearly as good as people make them out to be. And then Philadelphia, I have Philadelphia beating the second team in the NFC East by 4 games. I have Philadelphia winning 11 and Dallas just 7. I'm not a big believer on Jalen Hurts, though. I've never been a big fan of him. But when you have all these, weapons he has now, when you look at their roster, they had a terrific draft, getting Davis and Kobe Dean. They just traded for Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. Devontae Smith had a great rookie year. And this Eagles team was in the playoffs last year with a first-year head coach. I think this Eagles team can kind of take the next leap and be pretty good this year. And I definitely think they are 100% going to end up winning the NFC East this year. I would be shocked if the Eagles don't win the division this upcoming season.
And so I agree with you. I have the Eagles winning the division with the same record. Then I have the Cowboys in second place with a bit more of a positive outlook. 9-8. I agree with everything you said. losing Will Collins and other guys that they did lose, that's going to hurt them and going to hurt them badly. But the way I see it, I have a bit more of a distance between the Cowboys and the Commanders and excuse me, the Giants, just because of the quarterback play. I'm not a fan of Dak, but I would comfortably take him over those teams' quarterbacks. So I have them at 9-8 for those games coming from the Commanders and Giants, just because I think those teams are not very good. Then I have the Giants in third at 5-12, then the Commanders in fourth with 4-13. I'm not fond of any of Daniel Jones for the Giants or Carson Wentz on the Commanders. I think they're both going to have a really bad year. They're going to be in potential position where the media is talking about, could they possibly take CJ Stroud? Could they possibly take Bryce Young? I think they could both potentially have top 5 or absolute worst top 7 or 10 pick.
Yeah, you look at the NFC East this year. It's pretty much kind of like I said with the AFC East. It's the Eagles to lose. Should be interesting. Kind of moving to the AFC West. When you look at the best divisions in the NFL the past 5 years, even the past decade, I'd say, to me, I might sound biased. I think it's been the AFC North year in and year out. They've had multiple teams in the postseason. They've had great teams, even the sucky teams who are like 6-11 or what could be playoff contenders in any other division. But now when you go to the AFC West, this AFC West is freaking loaded. When your worst quarterback in your division is Derek Carr, that kind of speaks volume how good your division is. All 4 of these teams are Super Bowl contenders to me. I think it's absolutely crazy. Looking at this here, AFC West, they're pretty much all the same because to me, they're all so great, but none of them really stands out compared to the other ones. I had the Raiders 11-6. At first, like I was looking at rosters and teams like a month or so ago, and at first I'm like, well, the Raiders team is kind of a little bit overrated. But the more you look at it, I think the Raiders are one of the more underrated teams in the league because you look at it. Not a lot of people talk about it, since we won. But, I mean, we were one play away from possibly losing to the Raiders in the playoffs. So they would have scored a touchdown, towards the end of the game. We got a game-sealing interception by Pratt. But you look at Derek Carr last season. He was freaking phenomenal. 4,800 passing yards. That was with his top target, Darren Waller, missing 6 games. And that's with, John Gruden and Rick Pisacci having multiple coaches. And now you add Devontae Adams. Like this team could be very, very good. Hunter Renfrow had over 1,000 yards last year as well. Third is Denver with the same record as 11-6. I've been high on Denver for years and years and years. I was so stupid in the 2020 season. I was so high on Denver. I picked Drew Lock as my MVP heading into the year. That tells you how high I was on him. Obviously, it didn't work out too well. But Denver as a team has had so many good wide receivers. Sutton, I think he's going to have a breakout year. You got some of these other guys like Jerry Jeudy. They have a nice offensive line, and they have a nice defense. When you look at Russell Wilson, if he was able to take Seattle to the postseason just about every single year with a god-awful offensive line, imagine what he could do with Denver now with a much improved offensive line and far more talent than what he had with Seattle towards the end of his season with Seattle past the last few seasons. Second, I have the Chiefs with 11-6. The Chiefs are interesting to me. I don't think they're going to be as good as people think. Obviously, they're going to be good because Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, but I think they're going to take a step back. I think with trading Tyreek Hill to the Dolphins, that's going to hurt them a lot. I don't think Juju Smith and Valdez-Scantling can kind of fill that void that they're going to miss with Tyreek Hill, but I still expect them to be good. And then first is the Chargers. I really think the Chargers will win the division. I won't be surprised if they won't because, like I said, all 40 teams are great. When you have Justin Herbert, one of the better quarterbacks in the league, and who was great last season, you have so many weapons. I think Mike Williams is going to have a career year. You get J.C. Jackson, who's been phenomenal these last few years. You trade to get Khalil Mack for basically nothing. This Chargers team already had a really good roster, and then with the offseason, they have even a better roster. Like I said, I think all 4 of these teams are playoff contenders, but I think all 4 of these teams are Super Bowl contenders, but there's none that really just stands out. But I just think all of them are so good. If any of these 4 teams were in any other division, I possibly would have them winning the division. But playing in a tough division like the AFC West, it's just kind of a toss-up. And it should be very interesting for the AFC West. Definitely, to me, as we head into the season, the most intriguing division in the NFL.
Yeah, and like you, I'm very high on this division. I have two total different records for the four teams in this. For third and fourth place, I have 10-7 with the Broncos officially in last and the Raiders in third. Then I have 11-6 with the Chargers and Chiefs. The Chiefs coming out first. By the way, I did the predictions. I gave them one more division win. And yeah, I agree with you. None of these like stick out. Obviously, the Chiefs, they have Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, Chargers, Justin Herbert going to his third year, coming off a phenomenal year. And we still have Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Austin Eckler, and with Carr, like, and the Raiders and Carr, like the way Carr handled last season with all the BS he was put through by Gruden and the emails, I was just appalled. I thought they should have kept their head coach because he deserved. Now I understand why they didn't, but I think he will become a head coach again one day, and not as an intern, as an official guy. Then with the Broncos, obviously Russell Wilson is a massive upgrade. People have different opinions about him. I don't think he's in its prime anymore, but he's still above average to put it at worst. And I think he's better than that. And he is going to get the Broncos a fair amount of wins.
Yeah, it should be interesting with the AFC West. And, talking about Russell Wilson, obviously up to this point, he spent his whole career with Seattle, switching over to the NFC West. Seattle, arguably the worst team in the NFL. I think that's certainly a fair take. Some would say Seattle, I think they're going to be god awful. And with Drew Lock, during his time with Denver, if he didn't succeed with Denver, he's definitely not going to succeed with Seattle with a horrible offensive line. I have Seattle having the worst record in NFL with 2-15, followed by them in third place in the NFC West. I have the Cardinals. The Cardinals, to me, are a team who can be a really good team, but other times they just suck. Like Kyler Murray is very inconsistent, and we've seen literally there are stats to back it up, and it makes no sense. Cliff Kingsbury, the first half of seasons is phenomenal. The second half, he is horrible as a head coach. It just does not make any sense at all. But I had the Cardinals 8-9. Second in NFC West, I had the 49ers 9-8. And this is so crazy to me that we're talking about Trey Lance, who's going to be starting this year for the 49ers. I mean, he's going to be a good quarterback, but it's the fact, like, just change a play or two in the NFC Championship game, and we're seeing the Bengals play the 49ers in the Super Bowl. Like, it's so crazy. The 49ers were so close to being in the Super Bowl last season, and they're now having a new quarterback in Trey Lance. Like, it's so, like, Jimmy Garoppolo is the most, I would say, one of the most game manager quarterbacks in the NFL. He's not great. He's not horrible. He can win you games, but he's not going to wow you with yards and, stuff, stats and stuff like that. But the fact that they were so close with Jimmy Garoppolo, who was average basically last year, just like any other year before Garoppolo, almost making it to the Super Bowl, it's very interesting to me. I want to see how Trey Lance plays this year with San Francisco. If he plays good, I could definitely see them winning more than 9. But with his first full season, with playing the Rams and the Cardinals, I have them at 8-9. That's not an easy win. And the Cardinals were in the postseason last year, but I'm interested to see how Lance performs with the San Francisco 49ers this upcoming year. But I have them at 9-8. And then first in NFC West, I have the Rams 13-4. Something to me when you look at the off-season acquisitions, one of the more head-scratcher ones was the Rams trading Robert Woods to the Titans. I just did not understand it at all, because when you look at Robert Woods last season, up until he got injured, he was on pace to possibly have a career year. And with him, him getting hurt really, set, Cooper Kupp's season on fire. That's when Cooper Kupp really started to get going. But they traded Robert Woods to the Titans for basically nothing, and they kind of replaced him and getting they basically replaced him by getting Allen Robinson. To me, I would rather have Robert Woods than Allen Robinson in the Rams. They lost Von Miller to the Bills, but they did sign Bobby Wagner, a guy who has had at least 133 tackles. I think each of the last 6 seasons, he had 170 tackles last season. It's absolutely crazy. The Rams did lose a couple people, but they kind of they got the players back. Like, they got Bobby Wagner to basically replace Von Miller. They got Allen Robinson to replace Robert Woods. This Rams team did lose a couple people, but I still expect them to be one of the best teams in NFL and definitely contend for Super Bowl this upcoming year. But I have the Rams, as no surprise, winning the NFC West this season with a 13-4 record.
Yes, I have the Rams winning the division as well at 12-5, so similar to yours. Then I have the 49ers in second at 11-6. I then have the Cardinals at 8-9, and then I have the Seahawks, same as you, 2-15. I think the 49ers are going to make it somewhat of a race, you say, for the division, but I think the Rams are going to be comfortably in the lead for a majority of the season for the division.
And when you look at the 49ers, to me, I think they have a much better, future than people would think because obviously they traded a ton of draft picks to acquire Trey Lance. But I'm taking this 49ers coaching staff, even though Shanahan is inconsistent, over Cliff Kingsbury any day because Kingsbury is one of the most inconsistent coaches in the NFL. And when you look at the Rams, yeah, they have great players, but Stafford's not going to play forever. Bobby Wagner's not going to play forever. When you look at some of their players, obviously Donald's, relatively not old. Ramsey's not that old. But when you look at some of their better players, some of them are kind of getting up there in age. I think the 49ers have a great future. I think I could definitely see them possibly being kind of the kings of the NFC West in a couple of years once Trey Lance really hits his prime. But it should be interesting in that division. Switching to the NFC North, this one's interesting to me. I think it's a better division than people give them credit for. Fourth place, I have the Bears at 3-14. They have a horrible offensive line. They have Darnell Mooney, who I'm high on, but aside from him, they don't have any great wide receivers for Justin Fields. If you want your young quarterback to succeed, you need a good offensive line, you need some good weapons, and you need an offensive-minded coach. Getting Matt Eberflus, the former defense coordinator for the Colts, was kind of a head-scratcher to me. This has already been a defensive-minded team for so many years, and they had a bad defense last year. I don't get why you wouldn't try to get an offensive-minded coach. When you look at some of these young coaches, McDermott with Josh Allen, Taylor with Burrow, Sean McVay and Stafford or / Golf. It's not a coincidence that these young, offensive coaches are getting the best out of the quarterback. I don't get why you get a defensive-minded guy for Justin Fields. Third place in the NFC North, I have the Lions. I really think the Lions are capable of being in the playoffs because, one, how bad the NFC is, and two, they have a much better roster than people think they do. Amon St. Brown last season had over 90 receptions, over 900 yards, and I believe 5 or 6 touchdowns. I mean, they have so many great players. T.J. Hawkinson, they drafted Jameson Williams. They signed DJ Chark, who I think is pretty underrated. DeAndre Swift's a nice running back. They have a top 5 offensive line, with Penei Sewell, Decker, and some of those other guys. Frank Ragnow. Their defense, that's kind of a question mark, though, and obviously the main question mark is Jared Goff. Jared Goff has no more excuses. This team is a playoff team. Jared Goff can take this Lions team to the postseason, but it all kind of depends on him. He's so inconsistent. Second, I know this is going to sound crazy. I have the Packers second. I had this last year, and I was wrong, but I feel more comfortable picking it this year than I did last year. When you look at the Packers, I don't get how they've won, 13 games each of the last couple of years. Obviously, it does have a lot to do with their quarterback of Rodgers, but they don't have that great of a roster. When you lose Devontae Adams, that is a significant blow. That trade still makes no sense to me. Christian Watson, the draft pick from North Dakota State, is not going to be nowhere near the level of Devontae Adams, this upcoming season. This Packers team lost Darius Smith to their rival, the Minnesota Vikings. When you look at the Vikings last season, they were second in the NFL, I believe, with 51 sacks. And now you get Darius Smith from Green Bay, your rival. Darius Smith, his last 2 seasons, has had 26 sacks combined. So 13 sacks on average last 2 seasons. You look at Minnesota, second in sacks last season. I believe they signed Hicks from Arizona, who's ever had over 100 tackles the last couple of years. They had a nice draft, drafting Booth and the secondary player from Georgia. But when you look at the Vikings, I think they have a better roster than the Packers by a large margin. Obviously, the main thing is quarterback. Rodgers and Kirk Cousins, it's not even a debate. Rodgers is far and ahead better than Kirk Cousins. But I think this Packers team is going to take a step back. And I think this Vikings team is capable of winning the division. I wouldn't be shocked if they wouldn't. But I think this is a little bit closer than people think it is as we head into the season with the NFC North.
Yeah, so I have the Bears at 5-12. I'm a big fan of Justin Fields. He's so far not been put in the greatest situation, but I think we're going to see improvement. I think we're going to see enough flashes throughout the season that are going to put the Bears in games, potentially allow them to win. But overall, they still don't have a very talented roster. Obviously, Darnell Mooney, who you talked about, also like Montgomery. He's obviously not one of the best backs in the NFL. He's not of him making a bunch of game-changing plays is very low. You may see it here and there, but he's going to be a consistent guy as long as the Bears' offensive line doesn't fall apart. And I think when you have at least talent like that, it's going to get you a few more wins than people may expect. Next, I have the Lions at 6-11. I agree with you. I think they have playoff potential. And frankly, I just don't think Jared Goff's going to get it done. He has had multiple chances in the past, and we've consistently seen him struggle and not take advantage of those opportunities. I like Dan Campbell as a coach, but obviously you can't. I think that with Goff at this point, it's something mental, and I don't think Campbell can change that. If McVay can't, then Campbell won't be able to. Sorry, Goff. Then next, I have the Vikings at 9-8. They're always in this weird position. They have talent. Justin Jefferson, phenomenal receiver, already top 5 in the NFL. Dalvin Cook is a phenomenal running back. Adam Thielen, at this point in his career, I think he's a bit underrated. So yeah, they're going to get wins. Kirk Cousins is no Joe Burrow. He's no Patrick Mahomes. But yeah, if you give him time, he is going to make the throws. Obviously, week 1 last year when he played the Bengals in Cincinnati, we saw him make some phenomenal throws. So yeah, he is going to be, while he isn't one of the best of the best, he's going to be making enough throws to scare defenses. And when you consider talent around him, they are going to make some really nice plays and win some big games. But in first place, I do have the Green Bay Packers at 11-6. I agree with you about the Devontae Adams trade. I have no idea what was going through the thought process of the Packers front office. Good for the Raiders, though. But I think Rodgers is going to get it done. Despite the weird offseason drama, and there's always something going on with Rodgers, it seems like. I think he's just too talented to miss the playoffs and to not win the division as of now. What I am curious to see is, with the loss of Devontae Adams, how hard is that going to hurt his productivity? Because it's common sense. He's not going to be quite as productive unless if there's some unknown superstar wide receiver on that roster, and that shouldn't be held against Rodgers. But this is the first time in a long time we're going to see him play without one of the best receivers. So I am interested to see how that affects him, and I certainly do see a scenario where the Vikings do win the division.
Should be very interesting with the NFC North, and that leaves the final division, the AFC North. So looking at the AFC North, obviously the Bengals won the AFC North last season at 10-7, and Joe Burrow's first full season, taking us to the Super Bowl and nearly winning us our first, ever Super Bowl. When you look at the Bengals this upcoming season, lots of people expect us to win a division. Again, deservingly so. We had the best roster. We had the best quarterback. But when you look at the AFC North heading into the season, who do you think the biggest threat to the Bengals is in the AFC North as we're getting closer to the NFL season?
It's got to be the Baltimore Ravens. Building throughout this offseason, we've heard a lot of, let's just say, funny excuses from the Ravens fans, But and while I don't agree with those excuses, they did have some fuel on them. Like, they were one of the most injured teams last year. We can't completely ignore that fact. And obviously Lamar Jackson, he was injured this amount of time. They're going to be healthier this season. And with the Cleveland Browns, if Watson was playing the whole season, I would probably pick them, but he is missing a lot of games. And even though Bengals will play Watson twice, if the Browns can't win games until Watson comes back, they're digging themselves in a hell of a hole and probably won't make the playoffs with the Steelers. To be frank, I'm just not threatened by Trubisky. While I think Deontay Jones is very good, obviously Najee Harris is good, and I think Fireman's going to keep improving. We saw last year that the Bengals can contain those guys, and when you do, what are they going to do next on offense? And they also did lose Juju Smith, who, despite the social media crap that really got him hated on a few years ago, he was always, I thought, a bit overrated. He was a fine slot receiver, but nothing special. So, yeah, just kind of when you narrowed it down, it is the Ravens. They have the best quarterback among those three teams. You could argue Watson, but without him playing in over a year, I have a hard time saying he can be better than Lamar. Obviously, still Mark Andrews. The Bengals have always had a tough time covering tight ends. It's just the Bengals' curse. I think when you compare the three teams left in the division, it's got to be the Ravens.
And this is interesting, and I totally get your point, and lots of people are going to say the Ravens. And year after year after year after year, I always talk about how the Steelers are so overrated, and they're not going to be nearly as good, and people need to stop talking about them so much. It just gets to the point where talking about that all the time, and they prove me wrong year after year after year. I think the biggest threat to the Bengals in the AFC North is the Steelers, and I know people don't talk about it much. But the Steelers, despite Ben Roethlisberger without a doubt having the worst season of his career last season, the Steelers were half a game for winning the AFC North last season. That's something people don't really talk about. It's absolutely crazy to think that. But when you look at the Steelers, they are just so talented year after year. Mike Tomlin is one of the best coaches in the NFL. He's never had the Steelers below a 500 mark since he's been the head coach in Pittsburgh. And when you look at last year with Roethlisberger, like I mentioned, that was the worst season of his career. He was horrible, god-awful. When you look at Trubisky or Kenny Pickett, even if those quarterbacks aren't great, even if they're just average, like 200 yards and a touchdown, something like normal, average stats, I think the Steelers team is the biggest threat to the Bengals in AFC North. I still don't expect them to win the division, but I think they're the biggest threat to the Bengals in the AFC North, partially because of that, because they're a great coach team who are always going to be competitive, and also because the injuries, yes, for Baltimore, that is something to talk about. But I was talking to people yesterday. When you look at it, not once when the Bengals were hurt these last 4 or 5 years did you ever hear, when the Bengals lost a game, oh, well, Cincinnati was injured. This past season, when you hear when the Ravens lost, oh, they were injured. That's all you ever heard about with the Baltimore Ravens. And up when the injuries started to pile up for Baltimore, up until that point, they were, in my opinion, the most overrated team in the NFL last season. It took Justin Tucker to make the longest field goal in NFL history to beat the winless Lions. When you look back at the Ravens last season, they came back and beat the Colts from 19 points down on Monday Night Football in overtime and beat the Indianapolis Colts. When you go back and watch that game, the Colts kicker, Rodrigo Blankenship, was hurt that game. He missed 2 field goals and extra points. If he makes any of those, the Ravens lose that game. When the Ravens played the Browns on Sunday Night Football, Lamar Jackson threw 4 interceptions. Since 2014, when teams throw for at least 4 interceptions, they were 0-54. That was the one time a team won. That was the first time since 2014 a team won while throwing 4 interceptions. People can say that I'm hating. I do hate the Ravens. I cannot stand Lamar Jackson. But there are stats and points to prove that the Ravens were extremely overrated last season. I think they're very overrated this year. To me, I don't think they're going to be as good as people think they are. They're going to be better, but I don't think by a lot. It kind of goes back to the Steelers. I think the Steelers can be the biggest threat to the Bengals. I still expect the Bengals to win the division, but I'm more scared of the Steelers at this point than the Ravens, also because when you look at our defense coordinator, Lou Anamaro, he's kind of been the defense coordinator to kind of figure out Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson, the past couple of times he's played against Cincinnati, has not performed like he did in years past. But yeah, I think the Steelers is the biggest threat to the Bengals in the AFC North this season, not the Baltimore Ravens.
One other thing that I should have mentioned earlier that makes me think the Ravens are the Steelers is that Steelers offensive line is just abysmal. And it was last year as well. And when you have an aging Ben Roethlisberger, you think having a guy like Trubisky or Pickett would at least help a little. And while that is a scenario that could happen, I think Big Ben, with that experience and leadership, he was able to overcome it a bit more than you would expect. When you Mitch Trubisky, we've seen him a lot. It was either with the Bears. You see a lot when the offensive line collapsed. He's not Joe Burrow. He doesn't keep his eyes down the field. He just kind of panics. So with that terrible offensive line, I think could be the difference, because if your quarterback can't go off script and you're facing even an average defense that can get a decent amount of pressure, that is could potentially take away a majority of your offensive game plan.
So when you look at the AFC North this season, I would imagine both of us have the Bengals winning the division. But who do you have? What are your predictions here for this upcoming year for the AFC North?
Yeah, so in last place, I have the Cleveland Browns at 8-9. I think they're going to start off the season really slow for obvious reasons. And then, as much as I hate watching, as much as I want to see him fail as both a football fan as trying to be a decent human being, he is very talented. It's going to take him a few games to get the rust off, but eventually we're going to see why teams, despite the situation, were willing to give up a lot of draft capital. And the Browns are going to get a few wins before he comes back. I'm actually a fan of Brissett, not that he's one of the best or anything, but I think he's a fine quarterback, a fine bridge quarterback, and he's been put in a very awkward position with the Cleveland Browns. And I wouldn't be surprised after this year he wants to get out, especially because about a week ago he made a comment in a press conference saying it's very easy for me to not be Deshaun Watson. That was definitely a shot towards Deshaun Watson. So I'd imagine there could be a situation where he's obviously going to try and win. He may not be overly fond. I could be reading way too much into that quote. Then next, I have the Pittsburgh Steelers at 9-8, so switching to 8-9. I agree. I agree with you. If Tomlin wasn't the coach, I'd probably have them in last place of the division because you're absolutely right. Year after year after year, he figures it out. I don't know how. I think he may be a genius, honestly, which makes me sick to say, but he is. So, yeah, I think the Steelers, per usual, are going to – I don't even know if it's a surprise anymore. I think a lot of people are honestly expecting them to at least finish not terrible. But yeah, so I think the Steelers are going to keep that consistency up. Next, I have the Ravens at 11-6. When I originally did this, I thought they were going to have another loss or two. But, like I said, Lamar, I don't like him, but he finds a way to be productive. Yeah, he has really bad games, the 4-interception game. And even his one game, I should say, against the Bengals last year, he missed a lot of throws. But but when you consider that mobility, his targets, I think he's going to find a way to get wins. I still think there's enough defensive coordinators who are too old school to really adjust to his style of play. Then I have the Bengals at 12-5 winning the division. We could talk about the Bengals roster and everything, but I'm sure a lot of people watching this probably already have a really good idea. It's just Joe Burrow's going to find a way. He has that confidence. I think the idea of them having a Super Bowl hangover is just immature. People trying to get clicks because they signed 3 new offensive linemen. They're going to have 4 new starting offensive linemen, and the one remaining starter was arguably the best or second best starter from last year, who was definitely nothing great, but he was at least average. And, if your third, fourth, or fifth best offensive lineman, hopefully fourth or fifth is just average, you probably have a pretty decent offensive line. Yeah, they had a really good draft. As we've seen in preseason, Daxton Hill is a very versatile player. And obviously Cam Taylor-Britt, him starting the year on the IR is a bit of a bummer. He could potentially be back after 4 games. But people can hate on Eli Apple as much as they want, but he is a fine starting corner. And I think Apple's going to emphasize that. I also think him and Pickens week 1 are going to be a fun matchup.
That should definitely be interesting with Apple and Pickens. I agree with Apple is better than people give him credit for. The national media think he's like the worst corner in the league, but they only show when he gives up a touchdown or a huge reception. But I feel like it's one of the situations with Apple. He kind of puts that target on his back. Like he kind of creates a lot of it when he posts on Twitter and crap like that. I don't think when you post stuff like that and then play happens, you kind of get what you have coming in the way. Like I just don't get that. But with AFC North, to me, I have the Cleveland Browns last in the division at 6-11. If Watson was starting, this could be different. I maybe they'd be third. Who knows? But I just don't really buy in Jacoby Brissett. He could be good one game, and the other game he could just look really, really bad. The Ravens, I have an 8-9. I wouldn't be shocked if maybe they had 9 wins or so. But like I said, there are stats to back it up. I'm just not high on the Ravens this season. The Steelers 9-8. I kind of already talked about it. I still think, despite their quarterback controversy, their bad offensive line, I still think some way, somehow, they're going to be able to manage to go over 500 once again with Mike Tomlin. And the Bengals, I have them at 11-6. This is very interesting. I mean, when you look at us last season, I mean, Joe Burrow was sacked. I mean, I don't even know how many times last year. I believe 51 times, and bringing three new studs in the offensive line, and you have people, like you mentioned, these people, basically for clickbait, oh, Super Bowl hangover, they're not going to win a division. That's a bunch of BS. When you look at it, this was Burrow's first full season, Chase's first year. At times, I think the Bengals did get lucky. When you look at the years past, the Bengals were a team that just could be so unlucky throughout certain games. But when you look at last season, including the postseason, the Bengals had 7 wins by one possession. That was unheard of up until this past season. When you had game-winning kicks against the Vikings, the Chiefs both games, the Titans, and the game-winning pick by Pratt against the Raiders, there were times the Bengals did get kind of lucky, but I still expect them to be pretty good this season. I have them at 11-6. Fully expect them to win the division this upcoming year. Would be shocked if they didn't. But to me, I think the biggest threat to them is the Steelers. But I still expect them to win the division by at least, I would say, maybe 2 games or so. So kind of talking about the AFC North, kind of did all these divisions here. We'll kind of go ahead start talking about the Bengals schedule. I'll go ahead and make my picks game by game here. Then after this, you can go ahead and do it. So week 1, I have them taking on Pittsburgh. I have them getting a win in the season opener against Pittsburgh. I wouldn't be shocked if this is a close game, closer than people think it is. But I still expect Cincinnati to pull off a season opener victory against the Steelers that makes it 1-0. Week 2 at Dallas. I think the Bengals will win this game. Like I said, I think Dallas is very overrated. Go to 2-0 on the season. Week 3 at the Jets. It's so weird making these record predictions. I always have a game where the Bengals lose when they shouldn't. For example, look at last season. The Bengals swept the Ravens, swept the Steelers, swept the Chiefs, but lost to the Bears and freaking Mike White Jets. It makes absolutely no sense. It's bound to happen. The Bengals will have a couple, games where they lose and they shouldn't. I don't think this will happen again with the Jets, but I think this could be a close game. And when you look at Zach Wilson, this might be his first game, back from his injury. I'm very excited to see a possible Zach Wilson against Joe Burrow head-to-head matchup, because I think both those quarterbacks, obviously we've already seen what Burrow can do. I'm really high on Zach Wilson. This game, I really want to see Sauce Gardner on Jamar Chase. I think that is, a top matchup to see that people aren't really talking about enough. I mean, that is top dollar matchup there to see. But I expect the Bengals to get a win at the Jets, go to 3-0. Week 4, I kind of have an upset loss here against Miami on Thursday Night Football. I have them losing to go to 3-1. Tua, we've already kind of talked about it. He's very inconsistent, but even if he's average, this Dolphins team can be good. I mean, they have so many weapons. This offensive line is much, much better than it has been in years past. They have some nice weapons like Mike Gesicki, Cedric Wilson Jr., Tyreek Hill, some other guys as well. But I have the upset loss here against the Miami Dolphins on Thursday Night Football. Week 5 at the Baltimore Ravens, I had them getting a win there to improve their record to 4-1 on the season. Week 6 in New Orleans, I think this is a game where Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase absolutely ball out. I would not be surprised. This is one of those games where Burrow has a performance that he did against Baltimore last season, basically kind of like a homecoming, with Burrow and Chase playing at LSU and playing in New Orleans. But I think this could be a very close game. I already kind of talked about I'm really high on the Saints this season with Winston. I think they're going to be a tough team to watch out for this year. But I expect the Bengals to get a win here in Week 6 to improve their record to 5-1. Week 7 versus Atlanta, not really much explanation there. Atlanta has one of the worst rosters. That's an easy win to improve to 6-1. Week 8 at Cleveland, we should not lose this game, but I definitely think it's possible. Kevin Stefanski is 4-0 against the Bengals. It makes absolutely no sense that the Bengals just cannot beat the Cleveland Browns. With Deshaun Watson not playing this game, I think that's obviously going to have a huge impact on the outcome and the winner of this game. I have the Bengals beating the Browns here to improve their record to 7-1 on the season. Week 9 against Carolina, I had them losing. I know I sound crazy, but when you look at it, like I already said, they're going to have at least a game or two where they lose. And I had them losing Carolina here in Week 9. That drops their record to 7-2. And when you look at the best quarterbacks of all time, Tom Brady is number 2, and Baker Mayfield against the Bengals is number 1. It makes no freaking sense how Baker Mayfield just always balls out against us year after year after year. And now we have some great weapons in Christian McCaffrey and DJ Moore. I think this is a game, where Baker Mayfield balls out again against Cincinnati. I have us getting an upset loss there against Carolina. We are 7-2 heading into the bye week in Week 10. Week 11 at Pittsburgh. Sunday Night Football, I have us getting an upset loss there as well. I really think this is a game that we could end up losing, and I think both of our matchups against Pittsburgh could be closer than people expect. Pittsburgh is already a tough team, but when you play Pittsburgh, in Pittsburgh, that's hard. When you play the Steelers in Pittsburgh on prime time, that is that much harder. They're one of the best teams on prime time. That is a even though the Steelers are like an 8-9, 9-8 team, not a great team, this would be a hard fought victory for the Bengals. But unfortunately, I have them losing to the Steelers here on week 11 to dropping the record to 7-3. Week 12 at Tennessee, a revenge game for Tennessee from the postseason loss against Cincinnati last season. But I have the Bengals beating Tennessee here in week 12 in Tennessee to improve their record to 8-3. Let's see here. Week 13 against Kansas City, another upset loss. The Bengals have a much better roster than the Chiefs. They beat them twice last year. They can definitely beat them again this year. But I think the Chiefs are going to have revenge on their mind. And I could see a situation where the Bengals maybe slip up and lose to the Chiefs. As we continue here, 8-4 heading into week 14. I have them beating the Cleveland Browns here in week 14 to improve their record to 9-4. This is a very interesting, matchup. Like I said, Cleveland always plays this tight these past couple years. Deshaun Watson against Joe Burrow should be a fun matchup. Week 15, this might be the game I'm most excited about. Tom Brady against Joe Burrow in Tampa Bay. I cannot wait to watch this game. I have the Bengals getting a win here. Some people might call this an upset victory. I don't think it's that big of an upset. I already kind of talked about, I think Tampa Bay is a little bit overrated heading into the season. Their roster is not nearly as good as people thinks it is heading into the season. But with that win there, the Bengals improved their record to 10-4. At New England here in Week 16, I could see a loss here, especially if weather comes into play. When you look at it, it's awful snowy at times in New England, and the Bengals, despite playing at Cincinnati, don't really have a huge track record of playing in really really cold weather and lots of snow these last several years. Despite Joe Burrow playing in Cincinnati and playing in Columbus at Ohio State, he doesn't have a whole lot of experience playing in cold weather. But this is a snowy game. I could definitely see a situation where the weather can kind of maybe determine the outcome of this game, and maybe New England gets a victory here in Week 16. But I do have the Bengals winning here in Week 16 to improving the record to 11-4. Week 17, I have them losing against the Buffalo Bills, dropping the record to 11-5. I think this is a game that could possibly be a game of the year candidate. Josh Allen against Joe Burrow is going to be so fun. Stephon Diggs and Jamar Chase, two of some of the best wide receivers in the NFL, should be a great game. They're Week 17 in Cincinnati. This could really go either way, but I'm going to give the edge to Buffalo here. The Bengals dropped their record to 11-5, heading into the final week in a home game against the Baltimore Ravens. I had them losing this game to Baltimore to drop the record to 11-6. The reason I had them losing is because at this point, much like we've seen this past season, I don't think Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, some of these other players are going to be playing because we're going to be resting our players, preparing them for the postseason. Because at this point, I think we've already clinched the AFC North. But my record prediction for the Bengals this upcoming season is 11-6. My ceiling for the Bengals, I think, is 12-5. I could see a situation where we're maybe slightly better than 11-6. My floor for them is 9-8. They should absolutely not be 9-8. But like I said, they've had slip up losses this past season. Maybe they have a couple this season. This schedule is much harder than people think it is. Most of these teams are playoff contenders. I'm very interested to see the Bengals this upcoming season. My record prediction for the Bengals, like I said, is 11-6 as we head into the 2022 season.
All right, and now for mine, I'm going to go down the list. Like I did with all the other division teams, I used one of those win-loss week-by-week websites to make the Bengals prediction record. So same website. So for the first game against the Steelers, I have that as a win, as I do with the Cowboys, Jets, and unlike you, I do have them beating the Dolphins. But then for their first loss of the year, I have that at the Baltimore Ravens. The Bengals have a nice winning streak going, but I think that's not going to go forever. They're going into Baltimore's environment. They're coming off 4 straight wins, and no matter who you're playing in the NFL, it is hard to get 4 straight wins then to 5. I think it's just not going to go their way. Then I have them beating the Saints, beating the Falcons. Then I have them losing to the Cleveland Browns and Watson's second game, I believe, back. No, like you talked about, Kevin Stefanski has a perfect record against the Bengals. The Bengals haven't figured out to beat them. I think that will change this year. So hint for the second game, I'll predict against the Browns, but I don't think that it's going to happen unless if Watson has a ton of rushes performing really bad. I don't think the first game against them is going to be a win. You know, it's funny you should mention the Panthers potentially upsetting the Bengals because I had the same thing going on. I had them losing to the Carolina Panthers, and big reasons were kind of what you said. There's always one or two losses every year, no matter who the quarterback is, no matter if it's the Zach Taylor era or the Marvin Lewis era. And that's just not a Bengals thing. You see it a lot with many different NFL teams. So not a big deal, but I think it will be the Panthers. Then next, I have them sweeping the Steelers. I may perhaps be overconfident. Yeah, Heinz Field is a very hard stadium to play, but I just think the Bengals will out talent them and coming off, at least in my predictions, two straight losses. They're not going to lose third straight to the Steelers. Then I have them beating the Titans. Then I have them losing to the Chiefs. You know, it is really, really hard to beat a team three straight times, let alone the Kansas City Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes. I think the Chiefs this time is going to get the better end of the game. I think it's going to be a really close game, but I think this time Patrick Mahomes is going to come away with the W. But I think it's going to be an intense game that can go anybody's way. Then in their second game against the Browns, I feel like they are going to beat them. They're going to break that. I think it would now be 5-game losing streak against them. Then I do have them losing against the Patriots. Not necessarily because of the weather. I think it could be a game where, as we all know, Bill Belichick is a master coach. And this just seems like one of the games for the Bengals. You're not playing a bad team, but they're playing a team that's good enough to where they can really frustrate your game plan. They can frustrate you as a team. And while Joe Burrow, he wouldn't let that mental mistakes get to him, I think going at New England's environment, playing Bill Belichick, going to their home, I think that's a game the Bengals could potentially lose. Obviously, I think they're more talented. They could win. But kind of like with we were talking about, every year you see teams getting upset, and I wouldn't necessarily call this a big upset. I guess you could definitely call it one, but nothing major. But I just think the Bengals won't get the win. Then I have them winning their final two games of the year against the Bills and the Ravens to finish with a 12-5 prediction and a 4-2 division record.
Should be very interesting with the Bengals. I believe I have a 4-2 record for the Bengals as well in the AFC North. 11-6 prediction for me, but it's one of those situations like their expectations are so high for Cincinnati. Like it's sky high, bigger than it ever has been before, and everybody's talking about Joe Burrow, deservingly so, one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. I mean, really took the NFL by storm. But, obviously with 3 new starters in the offensive line, really 4 with Cardell Volson. But when you look at the Bengals, people are talking about Burrow always going to have a better year. Burrow this, Chase this, T. Higgins. I think somebody that people really have just not talked about enough is Joe Mixon. I think Joe Mixon is going to have a career year. He's going to surprise people so much. When you look at Joe Mixon this past season, Joe Mixon had a career high in rushing yards. He had a career high in rushing touchdowns. Prior to this past season, Joe Mixon's most rushing touchdowns in a season was just 8. This past season, he had 13. When you look at this past season, Joe Mixon was only, I believe, 1 reception short of tying his career high for most receptions in a single season. Joe Mixon had his most receiving yards this past season in Cincinnati and also tied his career high in a season for most receiving touchdowns in a year. You kind of noticed this in the 2020 season with the Bengals. Joe Mixon only played 6 games that year, but you started to slowly seeing that Mixon was getting more involved in the pass catching game. And we saw this past season, and we really saw it a lot. People don't talk about it a lot, but we saw Joe Mixon be way more involved in the pass catching game in the postseason than, in years past. I think Joe Mixon is going to have a much, much, much better year than people think he's going to be. I think he could possibly have over 50 receptions this year. And when you look at it, Joe Mixon had over 1,500 yards this season. I think it's close. I think he can honestly be close around the 2,000 yard mark this upcoming year. I know I'm I might sound biased or I might be overhyping him a little bit, but Mixon to me, I think is somebody that people need to start talking about more. I think he's going to have a career year just like he did last season, but he's going to be phenomenal this season and going to be a huge part for the Bengals' success this upcoming year.
Oh, I completely agree. And don't forget career high and passing touchdowns as well. But like you said, a new offensive line and capable offensive line, and not freaking Isaiah Prince, with all due respect to him, or Jackson Carman, less respect to him. And yeah, like you said, you're completely right. He and just wasn't Joe Mixon; it was all the running backs getting more involved in the pass catching game last year. Like one of my favorite Chris Evans plays was his touchdown reception against the Lions. And the same game against the Lions, that screen pass to Mixon where Jamar Chase was acting like one of the best offensive linemen in the game, blocking the corner down the field. Samaje Perine against the Chiefs in the conference championship breaks a 40-yard screen before the half. And also, you see them be effective, not necessarily in the screen game. Obviously, Chris Evans' touchdown against the Lions wasn't, but you see them running, actually going out wide, running some slants, running some wheel routes. Yeah, I completely agree. Under the Zach Taylor era, we have seen Bengals running backs be more productive in the pass game. And I think we're going to see more of that from Mixon this year.
Yeah, definitely expect a career year for Mixon this upcoming season, and I think he's one of the most underrated. Despite him being one of the best running backs in the league, I think he's one of the most underrated heading into the season. So, looking at our awards here, heading into the season, we've already done our Bengals game by game picks. We've kind of slightly previewed each NFL division. So, can you kind of go through your awards here for the upcoming season that you have picks?
Yep, I'm going to pull them up here. Making these picks are always really hard. For like MVP, there's a bunch of guys you can say. And all of them have legit arguments. Tom Brady, he's Tom Brady. Aaron Rodgers, he's Aaron Rodgers. Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, both dynamic players. Joe Burrow, consistent, confident, is going to find a way to win games. But for the NFL MVP, I have Josh Allen. Like I just kind of suggested a few seconds ago, it could go to anybody. One of the guys I stated about, I feel like it's his year for Offensive Player of the Year. I feel like it's going to be Jamar Chase. And I could be a little biased there. And like with MVP, there's a lot of players that can win it. I think we're going to see Chase certify himself as a top 3 receiver this year. He's already considered a top 5 or at worst top 6. But I think we're going to see going into his second year, because we have to remember his last year at LSU, he didn't play. He sat out. So, and obviously I don't think there's really any rust on him. If there was any rust on him last year, that's impressive how well he played. But I think just being in the league for a second, they're kind of rekindling that chemistry with Joe Burrow. We can see him even do a little better, especially with the revamped offensive line. Then for Defensive Player of the Year, I have Aaron Donald. I feel like that's just a safe bet, as regardless if he's swinging or helmets or not, he's going to be a monster. It could be other players, but I don't know really who else to say, as Aaron Donald always seems to be the front runner. For Rookie of the Year, I have Chris Olave. Agree with you. I'm really excited about Chris Olave. I think we're going to continue the trend of seeing a wide receiver win Rookie of the Year, as this really is becoming more of a pass-heavy league. For Defensive Rookie of the Year, I have Aiden Hutchinson. I really like him, which you normally don't see an Ohio State fans saying they really like Michigan defensive player. But I think he's going to live up to the hype. I think he could have anywhere from 6 to 8 sacks this year, while also having a strong presence in the run game. And then for Coach of the Year, I have the Eagles head coach, Nick Sirianni. If I said that wrong, please correct me. And then for Comeback Player of the Year, I hate to say it, I'm probably going to get hated on, but Lamar Jackson.
I agree with some of those picks. You mentioned Offensive Rookie of the Year. I also have Chris Olave as Offensive Rookie of the Year. And when you look at the wide receivers, it feels like at this point in the draft, every team is trying to find an extra Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. And I don't think there's going to be a player, to exceed, Chase's, performance last season. But if I think a wide receiver who's going to be closest to it this season, I think it's going to be Chris Olave. When you look at, he does have a couple, other wide receivers like Michael Thomas, but, he's hurt half the time. Jarvis Landry is, good. But as much as the, New Orleans Saints throw, as much as Jameis Winston throws, he's going to be throwing a ton of balls to Chris Olave. I think he's going to get over 1,000 yards this upcoming season. I have him as Offensive Rookie of the Year. Agreeing with you, I think he's going to be great. Defensive Rookie of the Year, I have Sauce Gardner, the corner from the Jets. He played phenomenal in the preseason, and like I said, I cannot wait to see him play against Jamar Chase. That is going to be so much fun. I think Sauce Gardner is going to be very, very good. Was one of the best corners in college football the past couple of years. I expect a similar situation, playing with the Jets. I think he's going to have an immediate impact for the Jets secondary. Coach of the Year, I have Dennis Allen. This was weird. I went back and forth between Nick Sirianni, like you, and Dennis Allen, but I don't know. I feel like I want to pick Dennis Allen because I feel like it's going to be more surprise and for the Saints winning the division and kind of surprising people than the Eagles winning the division. Nick Sirianni was somebody to me I thought should have been considered more last season, taking the Eagles to the playoffs his first year as a head coach. But I think he's definitely going to be up there. If it wasn't Dennis Allen, I probably would have Nick Sirianni. Comeback player of the year, Jameis Winston. I am so high on him this season. I think he's going to have over 5,000 yards. I can't name 3 quarterbacks who I think is going to have more passing yards than Jameis Winston this season. Like Michael Thomas, Landry, Chris Olave, all 3 of those guys are great. He had none of those guys last season and was 14 touchdowns and just 3 picks. I think people need to let it go with the 30 for 30 thing, with Tampa Bay a couple of years ago. Offensive player of the year, call me biased, but I think it's Joe Mixon. I already kind of mentioned that. Had career highs in rushing yards, rushing touchdowns, receiving yards, one short of most receptions in a season. With a much better offensive line and with Joe Mixon, getting more, targets in the passing game, I really think Joe Mixon can get around 2,000 yards this season, and I'm very excited to watch him play this season. Everybody's talking about Burrow, but people are not talking about Joe Mixon enough. Defensive player of the year, as much as it pains me to say it, I think it's T.J. Watt. As crazy as it sounds, every single year T.J. Watt has played in the NFL, the year following, he has exceeded his sacks. So each season he's played, he's got more sacks, which is crazy because he's one of the sack leaders year after year after year. He had the tie for the most sacks in NFL history this past season with 22 and a half sacks while playing 15 games. And it's so weird because when you look at quarterbacks, quarterback have a major, indication of a team's going to win or lose. Very, very rarely, but it can happen, can a defensive player take over a game and have a huge impact on the team winning. And that's kind of what we saw last year with the Steelers. Despite their quarterback playoff was awful and their offense was so bad, T.J. Watt, really, was a great player and, was the best defensive player last season and, really helped that Steelers team getting so many wins for a defensive player. That's something you don't hear. It can occasionally happen, but that was the same situation with T.J. Watt this past season. MVP to me, this is very interesting. I went back and forth pretty much the whole offseason. This is a very bold take. This is a quarterback I've never been high on. I think it's Derek Carr. I like Derek Carr a lot. When you look at Derek Carr this past season, like I already kind of mentioned, last season, Derek Carr had 4,800 passing yards. That was a career high for him, beat his career high years prior by over 600. He had 23 touchdowns this past year, nearly beat the Cincinnati Bengals in the postseason this past season. Derek Carr has the 6th most passing yards the last 2 seasons. The only quarterbacks who have more than him are Brady, Mahomes, Herbert, Stafford, and Allen. Pretty much the top 5-6 quarterbacks in the league aside from Joe Burrow. It's crazy. Look at Derek Carr, 4,800 passing yards. That was with Darren Waller missing 6 games. Like I already kind of mentioned, Rick Bisaccia and the, John Gruden situation. Now he adds Devontae Adams. Devontae Adams has the 2nd most receiving yards the last 2 seasons. And Devontae Adams has the most receiving touchdowns the last 2 seasons with 29 receiving touchdowns the last 2 seasons. And now Derek Carr, a guy who threw for nearly 5,000 passing yards against Devontae Adams, arguably the best receiver in the NFL. When you look at the catch percentage the last 2 seasons, with Devontae Adams, he is 5th in catch percentage for a wide receiver the last 2 seasons with at least 160 targets. But you look who was first in catch percentage in NFL for players with at least 160 targets the last 2 seasons. The first with the highest completion percentage, highest catch percentage for a wide receiver is Hunter Renfrow, a guy who is already on Derek Carr's team, a guy who had over 100 receptions last year, had over 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns. When you had Hunter Renfrow over 100 receptions, over 1,000 yards, 9 touchdowns. Darren Waller missed 6 games. You get the best wide receiver in the NFL on your team who's had 29 receiving touchdowns the last 2 years. And Derek Carr just had his best season ever. I really think Derek Carr can win the MVP this year. I always like to pick a quarterback or a player who's not really talked about, and I think Derek Carr has a legitimate chance to win the NFL MVP this upcoming season.
Yeah, I'm not going to act like I thought of Carr for MVP, but and also kind of like I mentioned that earlier, I really like Derek Carr. And when you factor in Davante Adams joining him and him having a career year, there's no, even if he doesn't win MVP, he's going to be getting talked about in the top 10 quarterbacks this year at minimum. I would spend a lot of money on that if I had the money. And yeah, I think once you, one thing he's always been really good at is it's always been his progressions, hitting different receivers. He's not a guy who's going to stare down Davante Adams. He's one of the smartest quarterbacks in the league, in my opinion. So when you have all those weapons and a very smart quarterback and a capable offensive line with, I guess, also capable, good running back in Josh Jacobs, you are putting him in a phenomenal situation. And I think I agree with you. I think we're going to see that crossover when the season starts, and we're going to see Carr lighting defenses up. He's going to frustrate defensive coordinators.
And like I said, I've never been super high on Derek Carr. Really, up until this past season, I always thought he was kind of a middle of the pack quarterback. But after this past season, everything he had to go through, even not to mention the Henry Ruggs situation, Damon Arnett, all the other off the field stuff that happened within the Raiders, the way he was able to perform this past year, and with all the weapons, I really think he's going to be having a great season. I think he's going to have a top 5 year for a quarterback this season. So something we did not really talk about was our Super Bowl picks. So who do you, kind of switching gears, who is your Super Bowl picks for the upcoming season?
So my Super Bowl pick, following with the MVP Josh Allen bandwagon, I think the Bills are going to make it. And then for the NFC, and I'm not confident in this at all, let me make sure I'm not going crazy here. I'm going to pull up the website. Yep, I'm not crazy. I did put the Buccaneers back into the Super Bowl. I know we have different perspectives of the Buccaneers, but like I was saying, Tom Brady, I know that's not exactly a valid excuse. Just one of those situations. Until I legitimately see him being stopped, I think he's at least going to make a run, maybe not make it. And there's a few other teams, like the Rams, they're going to be contenders again. I think there's an argument for the 49ers. Like we talked about earlier, they were just not a game away. They were literally a dropped interception away. We talked about luck in the NFL. Talk about some really bad luck. The 49ers, the other 52 guys on that team couldn't get to the Super Bowl because one guy made a silly drop. And obviously, you don't want to put it on him, but it just goes to show you one play or one sequence can really change a game. But I do have the Bills winning the Super Bowl.
The Super Bowl picks to me, with our awards, with MVP and some of these other, awards, I've kind of had a general idea, even if it's not been one player set in stone, maybe 2 or 3 players, and I kind of, take it down to eventually one. The Super Bowl picks, it's just, I feel like it's one of the hardest picks ever this season. Because when you look at the NFC is nowhere near the level of talent the AFC has. The NFC only really has, to me, a couple of contenders. I know you're really high in Tampa Bay. I'm not high in Tampa Bay, but obviously you can't. Obviously they're going to be Super Bowl contenders as long as they have Tom Brady as their quarterback. I'm just not really high on them like other people, but I still expect them to be one of the best teams in the NFC. But the NFC, I'm going to pick the Rams because when you start looking at it, there's not really many teams to choose from the NFC. Then you go to the AFC, that is a completely different story. You can really have the Bengals, Bills. Just go ahead and toss in the whole freaking AFC West. It's so interesting. I know I'm going to get hate for this because lots of Bengal fans hate the Chargers. They hate Herbert. I want to have the Chargers. I'm going to have the Chargers and the Rams. I'm going to have the Chargers win it. And that's something really up until today, I went back and forth with the AFC. I went back and forth between the Bills and the Chargers, and whoever I had winning the AFC, I was going to have winning the Super Bowl. But I think it's going to be the Chargers and the Rams. The Chargers are going to win the Super Bowl. It should be interesting. I mean, this AFC is just so freaking stacked. Should be very interesting this upcoming season. We are 1 week away today. The Bengals play the Steelers in week 1. Just does not seem like it. I mean, this was the fastest offseason ever. So, kind of talking about the awards here, Super Bowl picks, game by game Bengals schedule, talking about each division, kind of preview slightly there. So you kind of have any, final thoughts or anything like that as we, head into the 2022 regular season?
I know, not that much at all. And it is one thing to say is, this is a different team from last year. Expectations are sky high, no pun intended for the Disney movie. But as they should be, we have to remember, these are humans. Not everything's going to be perfect. Yeah, they added a lot new offensive line. They got decently better. That doesn't mean they're going to go undefeated. They're going to lose games. And this obviously really applies to any NFL team. And we're all passionate sports fans. If you're watching this video, I'm sure you are passionate. But it's just, there's going to be bad moments, like we talked about when doing the Bengals week by week. There's probably going to be a loss or two that should have not happened, but it just happens. It's the NFL. Even when you lose to these bad teams, they're still professional NFL players. They're starting, and maybe not all of them should be starting, but at the least, there's a reason they're in the league. And I know that's a bit soft to say or a bit cliche because I always hated the argument. If you said, I don't like this guy, we should cut him, people are like, well, he's on an NFL team unlike you. So I try to stay away from that. But, it's going to happen, especially when these guys who are not as good do play teams like the Bengals. This is their moment. This is their time to prove they can make an NFL team. And like we've seen from past years and like we'll probably see from this year, it's going to happen from here and there. So just because of one bad loss or one phenomenal win, I think it's important to not overreact.
I feel like overreacting is something when you watch ESPN, NFL Network, Fox Sports 1, but mainly ESPN, it's just something that they know no other way of doing. Like, they overreact about everything, and I completely agree with what you're saying. It's important to not overreact. Like, this Bengals offensive line, it's going to be good, much better than last season, but if it's not great week 1 against a really tough Pittsburgh Steelers defense, people shouldn't freak out. It's not going to change. I mean, despite our offensive line being very much improved, it's not going to be like, holy crap, this is the best offensive line in the league. It's going to be a slow, gradual process where this offensive line, has chemistry together. Because when you look at Leo Collins and some of these other guys didn't play in the preseason. So when you look at it, it's going to be a slow process. This Bengals offensive line will be good, but this first couple of weeks, if it's not great, you shouldn't overreact. It will get better, but towards the middle of the season. Because even look at last year, the Bengals, squeaked by the Vikings with a game-winning field goal by McPherson. We lose game 2 to the Bears. Burrow threw 3 interceptions. Zach Taylor was the number 1 coach top on the hot seat. The sky's falling down. Holy crap, what's going to happen? And I mean, we're in a freaking Super Bowl last season. It's crazy how the beginning of the season, towards the end of the season, how much things can change. But like you said, it's really important to not overreact. So we've really pretty much talked about all things you can possibly talk about with the NFL, just coming up a couple of days away. So Braeden, can you kind of tell some of the listeners where they can follow you on social media and everything like that?
Yeah, of course. So you can follow me on Instagram at Bengals_NFL. That is my main Bengals Instagram account. Then you can also subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's just my name, Braeden Guthrie. And I post a few different things here. I have what I call the Bengals NFL show. I'm also doing the Madden 23 franchise rebuild with the Atlanta Falcons. So I posted a few of those videos. So if you're a Madden fan or you're just really bored and you need something else to watch, go check that out. It helps me wonders. And lastly, you can follow me on Twitter. It's Bengals_action. But in my bio, I have my name as Bengals NFL.
Definitely go check out Braeden on Instagram, the best Bengals page on Instagram, with not bias like some of the other pages. Also check him out on Twitter and YouTube. I'll put in the links in the description below. You can follow me on Twitter, S2Time Show, the Sports 2 Show on Instagram. If you're new to the channel or if you've seen my videos before, make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel. I would really, really appreciate it. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time on the Sports 2 Show.